It's 11 days to the inauguration of Bola Tinubu as the 16th president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and we're counting down. Today, we'll be looking at another key sector of Nigeria's economy, the power sector. Many Nigerians are interested in this one and are hopeful that the incoming administration will have an answer to Nigeria's electricity challenges. Thanks for joining us on the program. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Remember to share your thoughts and questions now on Twitter if you use the hashtag countdown to May 29. Mention TVC News at TVC News NG and at Nifemi Oguntoye. Let's begin with some political updates. INEC has now submitted that the court is a public place, accessible to everyone, and satisfies all constitutional requirements. And this is in response to an application filed by the People's Democratic Party seeking live transmission of the court's proceedings. I'm talking about the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal. Counsel to INEC noted that live streaming is different from televising, and that in jurisdictions like the UK, where live streaming is done, it is controlled by the court. Judiciary correspondent Celestina Area has details.
The Independent National Electoral Commission, the APC, and the President-elect has told the court that they should not allow the PDP to turn the court to a football stadium, a crusade ground, a theatre or film ground where all manners of live broadcasts could be permitted. The respondents prayed the court not to grant an order that could not be enforced or supervised, as the present situation is not the best time for such a request to be granted. They wonder if the request is granted, it would expose judicial officers to unavoidable dangers, and demanded that a huge fine be imposed on the PDP for making the request. Lateef Fagbemi, senior advocate of Nigeria, who opposed on behalf of the APC, faulted the request, adding that the facility and policy documents are not there for the application to be granted. He said that the PDP failed to disclose injuries that they would suffer if the request was not granted, adding that at the moment, nobody, including Atiku Abubakar, had complained of inadequate coverage of the proceedings so far. The electoral body, in its own objection by its counsel, said that the courtroom is for serious business and not a marketplace where anything goes, adding that the request for live coverage is unnecessary and uncalled for and should not be granted. Chairman of the court subsequently reserved ruling on the application.
We are happy that our motion for televising of the proceedings has been taken today and ruling has been reserved. So that's a major accomplishment for today.
Parties in the petition filed by the Allied People's Movement, being the petitioner and the respondent, have all agreed not to object to documents duly certified by INEC. However, any document they will be objecting to, the objection will be done during the adoption of their final written address. Although the APM filed no application before the court, INEC filed two applications, one seeking to strike out certain paragraphs in the APM's petition and the other seeking to strike out the APM's reply to the application. Counsel to the APC and the President-elect also filed applications seeking to strike out APM's petition in its entirety. Counsels in the petition filed by the APM declined making any comments. The tribunal will continue its pre-hearing session tomorrow with a petition filed by Labour Party and its presidential candidates. Celestina Area, TVC News, Abuja.
Now let's talk about the power sector. Nigeria has a chronic electricity shortage that has affected the country for many years now. The country's electricity sector generates, transmits, and also distributes megawatts of electric power that is significantly less than what is needed to meet basic household and industrial needs. Nigeria, as we speak now, has 23 power generating plants connected to the national grid with the capacity to generate over 11,000 megawatts of electricity. But the power sector hasn't lived up to that capacity. Our power sector was aborted and privatized in 2013 with a view to creating a competitive market that would improve management and efficiency, as well as attract private investment. Well, the big question will be, what is government doing? Still paying huge subsidies in their billions on a monthly basis for a sector that we are told has the capacity to attract, a lot of private capital through equity investments. And what must the new administration of Bola Tinubu do differently? Joining me now is Rumu Daka Wunodi, who is founder and CEO ZKG Energy Partners Limited. He has over 25 years experience in infrastructure, energy markets and power development. He's also the pioneer MD CEO of the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading PLC and also led the regulatory and transactions team of the Presidential Task Force on Power, the PTFP. Also joining me is Barrister Sunday Oduton, Executive Director, Research and Advocacy of Association of Nigerian Electricity Distributors, the spokesman for the DISCOs. He was the pioneer legal advisor and company secretary of the Ibadan Electricity Distribution Company. Welcome to the program, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us. Let's begin with the privatization of the power sector and how you think it's fared in the last 10 years. Let's begin with you, Mr. Wunodi.
Thank you very much for having me. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the power sector has not met the aspirations and the expectations of Nigeria for the privatization. But I think there is no need to go back looking at what happened and what could have been done differently. The sector has been privatized and it's had challenges, and one of the bigger issues has been leadership, right? The ability to corral the sector, put a roadmap and continue to follow it with a clear understanding by the agencies in government and the private sector of what is required to be done. For the private sector, maybe operations and financing. For the government, putting in place the regulations, and not just putting in place the regulations, but actually following through with all the carrots and sticks that are required. So where we are, it's not performed very well. At 4,000 megawatts upon privatization, and they're now hovering between 5,000 and half gigawatts. It's not very good. And as a matter of fact, less people have access to electricity today in terms of a proportion of Nigerians. So it has not done very well. Let me stop at that.
Well, Barrister Odunto, I'm wondering what your assessment is about our performance in the past decade. If you consider that the federal government paid 120 billion naira last year to subsidize electricity consumers in selected bands, why do you think government still pays huge subsidy in billions on a monthly basis for a sector that has the capacity to, attract private capital through equity investments?
Thank you very much. Like my brother said, the privatization itself, people need to understand that it has been a transition process. It is a journey, and it's a very long journey. We are still in an infancy stage. We only clocked 10 years come the 1st of November this year, and there has been a lot of challenges. What I think is that if you look back to where we were after the 1st of November 2013 and where we are now, some progress has been made, but there are a lot of things that we need to do that are yet to be done. And I think going forward, all we need to look at is how best we can create a better power sector. And we can only do that by being realistic as to the reason for the failure of the past and what has been missing in the system. For instance, we at ANEC have been saying that a major requirement to make the sector better is the need for more cooperation, collaboration, and alignment within the value chain. When you talk about generation, transmission, and distribution, there has to be that alignment, be it technical alignment, commercial alignment, and there has to be a kind of risk alignment. So we have to look at the whole thing as a whole, the whole sector as a whole, and then begin to look at what is the best way for us to have a better power sector. Yes, the expectation has not been met, but some progress has been made. And I think lessons learned, because when we look back, this is not where we are supposed to be, but we are surely not where we were as of November 2000.
I hear you. Mr. Wonode, not quite a number of people have shown so much optimism like the barrister just did. Some have now called for the reversal of the privatization process, describing it as a failure. The argument is that the money government has spent post-privatization is way more than what government was given to the defunct NEPA and PHCN. What do you think about this particular observation and the call for a complete reversal?
Well, I don't know that I'll be one to support a complete reversal. You've got to think about what it takes to unwind the transactions, and government takes over all the distribution companies, and then they take back the ownership of the staff. That for me, it's not the alternative. But I think that for people who call for that, it's a clear indicator about the frustrations arising from the failure of the privatization to yield fruits. So I understand why some people might feel that that might be the way to go forward, but I think otherwise. Now, what Barrister Sunday has alluded to, I think, are the more technical and minute details. So I want to think that to address the power sector, we need to look at leadership and the policies from the top, and then we can begin to deal with the technical, commercial, and even regulatory issues associated with this. No, so if you follow this sector, just about a couple of months ago, President Buhari signed an amendment that has now allowed the state government to regulate distribution, transmission, and generation as we know it, right? So that has put another law, another policy in place. And for me, the incoming administration and the incoming state government need to sit together and begin to have an alignment of who does what when it comes to generation, when it comes to transmission, when it comes to fuel, when it comes to distribution. There has to be alignment so that even the private sector that is there do not face the issue of conflict of where or who actually should be their regulator, and you don't need to have multiple regulators. So for instance, I'm one that believes that distribution should be regulated by the states, right? So all distribution companies, for the ones that straddle more than 5 distribution companies, states, they could create the affiliates that are within the boundaries of the state and have a state utilities commission to regulate that. But these are conversations that need to be had between the states and the federal, and then the policy is set out and we begin to proceed. So if you're talking about, and that's why I think that for the incoming administration at the federal, the first work is alignment of policies across. And then what states are setting up regulatory bodies, what can the states do? And then you can then begin to think about how you can solve the issue. Talking about alignment of generation and transmission and all them things, I think that should come. But the first alignment needs to come very quickly. That's what needs to be done. You need to put the policy framework in a way that is clear. Right now, there's a lot of confusion. Lagos State wants to set up an electricity market, so does Edo State, so does Kaduna. There are other states that are looking to do some other things. Anambra is trying to get into some arrangement with EEDC. But all these things might just be become cacophonous if you do not, for any one reason, just put the policy. So incoming government needs to talk with the states and then set out the boundaries for regulation and policy, and then we can begin to get into the commercial and technical issues and ways that states can actually play a bigger role in making sure that the distribution of power gets to more businesses and homes.
I hear you.
Within their footprint.
Mr. Odunto, talking about what the incoming administration must do differently, 10 years after privatization, we still have a huge metering gap. Data in January this year puts it at only about 39% of registered customers who have now been metered. They say, discos rely on metered customers to be able to make profit from estimated billing. What do you think must be done differently in the life of the incoming administration?
Okay, first of all, let me make it very clear first that it is totally untrue that the discos rely on non-metered customers to make profit. Where's the profit? You see, no disco, no businessman will want to have customers, as we do, where the customer cannot determine his own consumption. When the customer is not able to measure his consumption, that's when such customers don't even manage the energy received. So it is in the interest of the discos and all of us for every single household in Nigeria to be metered. I think the new government, the incoming government, should look into a better policy for metering. In the last 8 years, we have had maybe 3 or 4 types of policies on metering. It is time to face the issue of metering by looking at the cost, who will pick up the cost, how do we get it done, how do we get people metered, other than making an announcement to say meter is free when the meter is not even available. So I think there's a need for a reset. There's a need to sit down and look at everything all over again and do what is right for this nation. And that's the area where the issue of leadership comes. Because if the leadership can sit down and say, you know what, we want every customer to be metered. How do we go about it? Who pays for the meter? What happens to meters that are defective, or a meter that catch fire, or anything happen to your meter? And what happened after 10 years or 15 years of that metering program? So these are the things that I think are lacking at the moment.
Indeed.
If we can do that, then we'll be fine.
Let's quickly talk about the Presidential Power Initiative. It's supposed to give us a more strategic and systematic approach to solving our power problems. In 2018, Nigeria and Germany agreed to explore cooperation in the power sector, and CMS Energy is expected to facilitate the financing of that project. Many are losing optimism 5 years after, but very quickly, we're running out of time now. I just want to get your opinion, Mr. Wonodi, about your expectation of the incoming administration as far as the PPI is concerned.
Well, I think that the incoming administration should hold on to that initiative and maybe treat it slightly differently. And again, I would like to see the state government play a more active role in funding of the power infrastructure. It's time that they look at this as providing basic infrastructure, just like you do roads. Thinking that because discos are being privatized, that government cannot play a part. Maybe the federal government should just give them the 40% and then let them make the investment that is necessary and come to agreement with the distribution companies, right? So they do that for the discos, and then the federal government can drive the Presidential Power Initiative, which should take care of primarily the transmission network and the interface between transmission and distribution. I think states should play more role in distribution infrastructure, including metering, and take over the regulation of that. So a state then has the opportunity to make the state business-friendly, competitive energy by setting the rates and the tariffs and whatever needs to be done. So the Presidential Initiative, the federal government should continue to drive that, but I want to see a complementary effort by the states in distribution
I hear you.
infrastructure.
Mr. Oduton, government is claiming that 80% of the equipment needed for the pilot project of the PPI was already available in the country and are being deployed to sites across the country to improve transmission. The discos are quite more involved in this project. How optimistic are you that the PPI project will see the light of the day in the incoming administration?
Well, like Rumu said, at the end of the day, the problem the Nigerian power sector is purely liquidity problem. And that can only be solved by good governance, leadership, and then we need to be realistic. A structurally defective house cannot be repaired or corrected by merely painting the house and changing the furniture. It is better to go and look straight at the column, see the root cause of the problem, the fundamental thing, right from the foundation. I think that is what we need to do, and that's why I mentioned the word reset. So the policies in place at the moment are good, but it's not enough to have a good policy. We also have to follow through and ensure that what we are proposing or putting forward are realistic. And as we talk about an aspect of the value chain, we have to talk about the whole value chain. And of course, it goes back to the issue of policy. And today, Nigeria needs to have 30,000 megawatts of electricity. That is the point. What we have today, let's call it 5,000, which is less than 5,000. But let's say 5,000. How do we move from 5 to 30? That's what the incoming administration should concern themselves with. How do we increase generation and simultaneously, that's why I spoke about alignment, simultaneously deal with the issue of transmission and distribution. What about funding? How and where do we get the funding from? And how do we ensure that whatever funding is provided is used for what it's meant for? So all of us have a lot of role to play.
Indeed.
The operators, the investors, the government, and of course, the Nigerian people. But at the end of the day, look at the other countries. When people compare us with other countries, well, it's good, but when you look at other countries, people pay for electricity. Go to Senegal, go to South Africa. They have issues, they have had issues before, go to India. But what I'm saying is that all of us need to know that electricity is a product, it has to be paid for, and government should not even be a debtor. Those are the kind of things we should look at.
But we're doing that now because government introduced service reflective tariff in 2020. So I want to believe that consumers in Nigeria now pay appropriate, price for power, right?
No.
Oh, all right.
No. What we have had is that it's a progressive movement towards a cost-reflective tariff. Tariffs are now more cost-reflective today than it was 5 years, 6 years ago. That is progress. But not that it is 100% cost-reflective. That point needs to be made.
So like you said, we're making progress, but we may not be there yet. Sunday Oduton is Executive Director, Research and Advocacy of Association of Nigerian Electricity Distributors. I also have, who joined me in the past couple of minutes, Ramondaka Wunodi, who is CEO ZKG Energy Partners Limited. Gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the program this evening.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's the countdown today.
Thank you very much.
You can watch a broadcast, a repeat broadcast by 6 a.m. on Friday. Remember to also join me again by 6 p.m. tomorrow for another edition. I am Nifemi Oguntoye.